Welcome to Podcast Editing Basics with Audacity. This is part 4. In this video, I'm going to talk about multi-track editing. So to review from the previous videos, we learned that we can edit in different ways within Audacity. We can also select audio by clicking and dragging in different tracks, either left to right or right to left. After we've done that, we can edit, copy, paste, duplicate, delete, and otherwise edit the tracks in different ways. We also learned we can select various parts of audio within a track and also silence them in the same way. Once we've done that, if we want to undo it, from the edit menu, we can undo and redo different edits actions. In this video, I want to build on that knowledge and talk about multi-track editing. So we know we can edit one track. We can select audio, we can change it different ways, edit, copy, paste, duplicate, delete. Again, we know all these actions. So we can actually extend that across tracks by not only clicking and dragging left to right, but also dragging down or up, depending on where track we select and the order that they are arranged. So we can in fact do all of these actions of editing, of cutting, copying and pasting, deleting and duplicating across multiple tracks as well. For example, I selected now the start and end of the selection from 8.045 to 12.324. If I cut, I will cut from both tracks simultaneously. I can select another part within both of these and edit as well. Notice it edited this into this, and had I selected both of these again, I could have pasted them all back in. Notice that the pasting only went to the selections that I had within that track. When I had only selected within the first track, it only pasted within the first track. When I selected across both tracks, it pasted into both tracks. So the operations we already know of, cutting, copying, pasting, deleting, and duplicating, exist across tracks, and we can edit them in the same way. So I'm now going to undo that, and undo that, and now we're back where we were. Again, remembering we can undo and redo actions within Audacity within the same session that we're working in. So the other thing I want to talk about is you may have noticed when we added new tracks, we got some additional little options over here on the side of each track. The first of which is mute. When I click on mute for a track, it mutes that entire track. So if I were to play this track, it would only play anything else that was not muted. This can be extremely helpful when editing across multiple tracks. Sometimes you want to listen to just one track or just a couple of tracks. So you can mute that entire track, listen to the new mix without that track, and then when you're done, go back and click to unmute it. This again is very helpful. Next to that is solo. If you click solo, it mutes any other tracks except that one. So this is sort of the inverse of that. So you can mute a single track or click solo to mute the rest of the tracks except the current one. Notice if I clicked mute for one track, after I selected solo for that one, it's now muted all of them. So I can unmute and unmute. I can also click solo and then unclick it to bring everything back. So muting and solo are two useful options for either muting a single track or muting all the other tracks except the current one you've selected. As well, at the bottom of every one is the select button. If I click that, it will select the entire track for me. This will allow me to cut, copy, paste, delete, duplicate, all the same actions we've done, except now on a track level instead of individual audio selection level. So I can select the entire track, and I can either select one or select the other. And if I hold down Shift, I can copy or select multiple tracks as well. Similar to within other operating systems, holding down Shift to select multiple things. So I click select on one track while holding down the Shift, also clicked select on another track to select all of that track as well. And then the same actions I mentioned before of cutting, copying, pasting, deleting, and duplicating would exist across these tracks. Finally, we can arrange tracks in different ways. You may have noticed the little drop-down menu next to select. Notice it makes this sort of minimized. And if I only wanted to edit one track, I could shrink all of these until I was ready to dive into those. I could also, clicking on the name, move the track down or up. So if I wanted to move this track to the bottom, I could do it, or go back and move the track up one, and arrange the tracks in the order I want. Remember, of course, we listen to audio linearly, so we listen left to right. So sometimes it may make sense to actually arrange the tracks in the order that you would hear them linearly. So if I wanted one track to appear first within the project, I could have it first within the arrangement. And then I could have the next sound or the next track after that, and in the order that I hear them. Again, this makes the most sense sometimes to arrange them in that way, but Audacity doesn't actually care, and you can arrange them in however order you want, moving them around from either top to bottom or arranging tracks in different ways. At the same time, you can also mute different tracks, or select just that solo track to mute the other tracks and listen to them as well. Sometimes you actually want to bump up the individual gain of a certain track. The little minus and plus underneath mute and solo allow you to do that. So if I just increase this gain just a little bit, it would increase the gain, the signal, of that particular track. So if I had some recordings of different people speaking and one person was a little softer or the recording wasn't quite as good, I could bump up the gain a little bit or turn another person down just a little bit on multiple recordings within a podcast project. Again, very useful as well. If within the stereo recording, the left channel or the right channel happen to be a little better than the other for whatever reason, I could also tweak that as well and change the left or right pan. If I needed just one to be a little bit stronger than the other, maybe because of recording setup or other ways, I could also do that as well. Finally, if I actually want to change what I see from a waveform to a waveform in decibel, I could do that, or change it to a spectrogram to see that as well. Usually the waveforms are the most useful. The other thing I want to mention is by default, by normal, Audacity uses stereo tracks, that is both a left and a right channel. If I want to reduce this to a mono track that is just a single channel, I can also do that by splitting a track either in stereo, swap the stereo channels, or split stereo to mono, which now gives me two separate tracks, one for left and one for right. This could be useful if you wanted to reduce the size of a project, where instead of stereo for each track, you split it into mono for each track, and then you could simply delete one of the channels. So that reduces the overall size of the project by reducing the number of tracks. This also could be very useful for podcasting to reduce the overall final size, to reduce everything to mono, and then finally export the project. Remembering, of course, as we saw in the previous video with importing and exporting, when I export, it's going to export it all down into a single stereo file anyway, because you can't listen to multiple stereo tracks at the same time. So keeping that in mind, it may make more sense, depending on the project, to reduce it all to mono anyway. And again, because this was an editing action, I can, of course, undo it and undo the split as well. So in this video to review, I've talked about multi-track editing. We learned that we can continue the editing actions we already know of cutting, copying, pasting, deleting, and duplicating across tracks by not only clicking and selecting audio left to right or right to left within a track, but dragging down to up or up to down to select multiple selections across tracks. Knowing those same editing actions apply there. We also saw that we can mute a single track by clicking on mute for that track, which will mute that entire track. or clicking solo, which will mute all the other tracks except that one, which can be very useful for listening to tracks while you're editing in different ways. We also saw we can change the gain of individual tracks by dragging left to right or right to left to change the gain of a particular track, either subtracting from it or adding to it to make it a little louder. We can also change in the same way left to right or right to left to change the pan of little more left channel or a little more right channel with an individual stereo track. We also saw we can select an entire track by clicking select, and if you hold down shift on the keyboard, select multiple tracks for editing tracks within an entire project. Finally, we saw within the track options, we can change what we perceive the form to be, either the waveform in decibels, or the spectrogram. And then we saw we can swap the stereo channels, split the stereo track, or split stereo to mono. Remembering, of course, that the ultimate, when exported, will be a single file with a stereo track, left and right, a single one of each. That it may make more sense in some projects to reduce the overall file size to actually split multiple things into mono and then export an entire project into mono for a single audio channel instead of two audio channels ultimately. Thanks for watching.